Hospitals and specialty imaging vendors need to exchange DICOM imaging studies securely. Flat file shares and manual handoffs make it difficult to limit access, reject bad files, preserve the original clinical study, and prove what happened to the data afterward. AWS HealthOps is a low-cost, infrastructure-as-code healthcare imaging exchange foundation for an MSP or hospital cloud team. It provides authenticated upload, basic DICOM routing, clinical zoning, quarantine, health imaging organization, event-driven provenance, and controlled delivery of approved derived 3D assets. The MSP Hospital Cloud Operations team manages AWS in this scenario. Imaging technicians, radiology 3D lab staff, researchers, and other authorized users use a purpose-built portal or their existing CS EHR workflow and not the AWS console. Secure intake, Cognito JWT, and HealthOps API. This is not a public file share. Cognito authenticates the user and API gateway verifies their JWT before the platform creates a narrowly scoped upload link. 5-minute pre-signed S3 put. The intake function creates a 5-minute upload URL for one permitted object. The partner receives no AWS credential and no open bucket access. S3 inbound zone. Every file lands in an inbound zone first. At this stage, it is untrusted and cannot yet enter the clinical imaging workflow. Routing Lambda. The routing control checks for a .dcm file name and the DICOM P10 DICM marker at byte 128. This is an intake routing safeguard, not a diagnostic or full clinical validation. S3 quarantine zone. Files that fail the check are isolated in quarantine rather than silently moving into the clinical data zone. Governed healthcare data. S3 clinical source zone. Valid DICOM objects move into a distinct clinical source zone with encryption, versioning, lifecycle controls, and public access blocked. AWS HealthImaging Data Store. When an appropriate licensed, de-identified study is added, AWS HealthImaging becomes the governed imaging layer. The original DICOM remains the clinical source of truth. S3 Audit Evidence Zone. The system writes routing, evidence, and provenance records here. Evidence is treated as a first-class output of the workflow. Amazon EventBridge. A completed health imaging report emits an event. EventBridge decouples the imaging service from the downstream audit workflow. AWS Step Functions. Step Functions makes this operational workflow visible and traceable rather than hiding it inside an opaque background script. What it does, it receives the health imaging import complete event, runs the record provenance task, invokes the provenance Lambda with the event payload, receives the Lambda result, ends in the completed state. Provenance Lambda. This function writes a record of where the import came from, its job ID, when it completed, and which event triggered it. It performs no inference, diagnosis, or clinical decision. Future on-demand segmentation. Segmentation and 3D asset creation are intentionally future on-demand capabilities. I avoided an always-on machine learning endpoint so the MVP stays within the cost target. Controlled delivery. S3 derived assets zone. Derived visual assets are separated from the clinical source. The viewer does not receive broad access to raw source DICOM. Cognito JWT plus HealthOps API. An authenticated user requests an approved asset through the API. The platform returns a short-lived download URL only for an allowed object. Delivery Lambda in HealthOps Delivery. The delivery function can access only the approved prefix in the derived assets bucket. This keeps source imaging and derived visualization assets deliberately separated. Future Web and Unreal Viewer, not deployed yet. The viewer is a consumer of approved assets, not a medical system of record. It receives a narrow, authorized result rather than unrestricted clinical imaging access. Cross-cutting operations and cost controls. Terraform and GitHub Actions. Terraform makes this environment repeatable. The data zones, IAM roles, event wiring, logs, API routes, and budget controls are all reviewable as code. Least privilege IAM role. The import role has a narrow purpose: read only the clinical source zone and write only the appropriate import-output evidence. CloudWatch provides execution-level troubleshooting evidence with short log retention appropriate to a low-cost portfolio environment. CloudTrail event history. CloudTrail helps an operator see which AWS identity changed control plane resources. In production, this would be a part of a broader audit and compliance design. AWS budget. This project has a budget of $1.50 per month with an alert at 80%. The MVP avoids always-on endpoints and is designed to stay at or below roughly 5 cents per day. A future health ops portal would sit in front of this architecture. Cognito sign-in with clinician, technician, research, and administrator roles. Simple upload and study status screen. Study list with validation import status and audit-friendly timestamps. A browser DICOM viewer, such as OHIF Cornerstone, for appropriately authorized users. Approved 3D output, preview, or download. An operational dashboard for the MSP, failed intake, quarantined files, workflow state, cost, and audit events. Integration with existing PACS, RIS, or EHR systems where appropriate. AWS is the secure platform layer. The clinician does not navigate buckets, lambdas, or step functions. They use a familiar imaging workflow portal, while the MSP operates the underlying cloud controls, audit trail, and cost boundary. AWS HealthOps replaces an ungoverned imaging handoff with a controlled cloud workflow. Trusted hospital and specialty imaging partners authenticate before uploading, invalid inputs are quarantined, clinical source data stays protected, and every important step leaves an audit trail. The result is a reusable, low-cost foundation an MSP or hospital cloud team can operate behind a clinician-friendly portal, so authorized users can work with approved imaging and visualization assets without needing direct access to AWS or the original clinical data.